third day of COP26 here at the Cryosphere Pavilion. A warm welcome to all of you that are here in Glasgow, but also, of course, all that are following us from Stockholm and Geneva, and also the ones that are following the Cryosphere initiatives via Facebook, Twitch and YouTube, of course. So today I'm really glad to introduce the Global Choices Organization and Inge Ralph, Sally Runway and Emma Wilkinson. I hope that the names are correct. And today, perfect. And today they are talking about protecting Central Arctic Ocean. So the floor is yours. Thanks.
Hello? No, it's not on. Right. Are you ready to go? Okay. It's not really, it's projecting onto the earphones. So, okay, good. Welcome everybody to this session at COP26. We're delighted to be here as Global Choices, and thank you to the Cryosphere Pavilion for hosting us. This is a bit of a session with a difference because we have been surrounded by scientists. We're surrounded by scientific facts and have been joyfully enjoying so many amazing sessions from scientists. But at Global Choices, we decided to take a slightly different tack. We are not scientists, but we are passionate about the Arctic. And why did we get there? Because when we took a deep dive into the climate space, we realized that actually there is very little prioritization, surprisingly. I mean, there's an amazing amount of action, lots of taking plastics out the ocean, planting trees, etc. But what was missing was the understanding that we were literally on our watch losing the linchpin and the thermostats of the Earth. And so we wanted to bring that into popular consciousness. And we also felt that the Arctic, which for so long has been a frozen piece up there somewhere, is now really something that is understood as a key piece of the global system and should really be taken as a global commons. That means it belongs to all of us. And one could argue that an indigenous Inuit is affected, of course, but an indigenous in the Marshall Islands, an indigenous person there is equally, if not more so, affected. So it really is something that belongs to all of us as global citizens. So we set about thinking, how do we raise consciousness about the importance of the Arctic as part of a system? And so we have created, first of all, a feminine organization. And why feminine? Because it's about the whole. And that is not to exclude men, but it's about understanding the whole and our need now to see these as part of a holistic system. And that we also have to do it in a way that sets self-interest aside. What we are realizing in the Arctic is there, and Sally will explain a little more about this later on, is that there are so many self-interested parties now who are vying for a piece of the Arctic. And yet when you see it as a key piece of that global system, we need to think about how can we absolutely do all we can to protect it. Now, of course, we have to keep to 1.5, that's key. But we do have some other action points that we would suggest, and Sally is going to speak to those in a while. The other point I would make is that we see the Arctic as being perhaps a way of illustrating what we need for the future and what we need to be future fit. And that is global governance, because we lack global governance for global commons. We need to be able to see how do we govern these spaces for the best interests of everyone. So I'm going to hand over to my co-founder, Sally Rani, and to speak a little bit about potential for a moratorium to protect that space. And then Emma, who is an Arctic Angel, will talk about why we created the Arctic Angel and the youth voices and how do we mobilize more popular voices to protect this beautiful, beautiful piece.
Thank you, Inga. Thank you very much. We are at a very critical point on the planet. And the Arctic is showing us right now, what's to come if we don't act urgently. And one of the things that I wanted to share with all of you today is that from our perspective, when you look at the global impacts, which I'll get into, the global impacts of losing the Arctic sea ice and the albedo effect is really the global SOS of our time. And there's nothing more urgent at this moment that's more visible to the global community than what's happening in the Arctic. It really is ground zero right now for climate change. And the reason is, which Inga alluded to, is there are so many different impacts. If you look at the science, when you look at what's linked to losing Arctic sea ice, it goes all the way to northern Africa, more droughts, more floods, more severe weather. They've even looked at the heat dome in the United States on the Pacific, Northwest Pacific coast, linked to losing the sea ice. Less moisture in the Amazon, linked to losing the sea ice. I even saw, and I don't know if this is verified yet scientifically, that fires in California, and of course we know that the droughts are for sure. Also, and I have a slide here later, it's affecting the jet stream, the ocean currents. This is really a global phenomenon, and the reason it is because every Earth system is connected to every other major Earth system, and we've been making our decisions in fragments instead of with whole systems in mind. We're not thinking whole systems. And so our decision-making process actually is going to have to include whole systems, thinking, whole system science, or we're not going to be making the right decisions in the future. So what we've decided to do actually is very bold and very courageous. And you could even say that we're the David and the Goliath situation. Because when you look at how much sea ice we've lost since 1979, these are satellite images from NASA. We've been able to watch ice extent and ice thickness since 1979. And you can see the difference between 1979 and 2020. There are some new images out, 2021, last month, and I'm sorry that I don't have those downloaded. There's only 1 year when the sea ice actually grew, and that was in 2012, and that's because Pinatubo blew up a volcano, and it's shadowed with ash. And so the ice was able to rebuild once again. And the ice now, the extent is thin, and the deeper ice, the older ice, which is really the glue for the whole Arctic sea ice system, is less and less. So it's really critical to protect the precious ice. So how do you bring a real focus to the global community? Everybody says, well, the Arctic is melting. It's 2-3 times faster than the rest of the Earth. It's kind of amorphous. So we brought a focus to this. And the focus is a moratorium on the Central Arctic Ocean. And what we have defined as the ice shield. It's the Central Arctic Ocean ice shield. This is where the majority of the ice extent is, but you'll also see to the south here, that's called the last ice area. And that's where some of the ice is supposed to last perhaps the longest. However, just recently, there was a big hole that was discovered that they hadn't seen before in the old ice area. So we're in dangerous territory here. What this map shows is the extent of what we're proposing. And so, excuse me, let's see. Yes, and what we're proposing is a moratorium on the Central Arctic Ocean ice shield. This is because this area is non-jurisdictional. It's a high seas global commons. And so no nation owns it yet. So this gives us an opportunity to protect it, both from immediate short-term activities that could harm it, and also for the long term for the global commons, which in the law of the sea, a global commons is the heritage of all mankind. It should say humankind, but that was in 1982. So, there is, oh, are you, no, not yet. Yeah, thank you. So what we're proposing in the short term, this is a 10-year moratorium on deep sea bed mining, oil and gas, across the North Pole, a transpolar sea route, shipping route, no more seismic testing, which is very disruptive to wildlife and to whales and narwhals and ocean marine life. It's very, very disorienting. Also, no radioactive waste dumping, which includes low radioactive waste, low level, and also we're looking at no nuclear weapon testing as well. All of these things should not be done in this area anyway. But the burden of proof seems to be on global citizens to protect this, which is a little backwards in my book. So what we're doing, this is preemptive and proactive. We're operating on the precautionary principle that says if you don't know what's going to happen, be cautious, take the most conservative route to protect. Okay, this 10 years is a pause so that science can catch up, so that ice diplomacy, what I call ice diplomacy between the Arctic nations, has a chance to progress around the idea that this is non-jurisdictional, a global commons, and that the ice needs to be protected in the short term. And it's also, it's a call to everyone on the planet. As a global citizen, we have to start acting and thinking as global citizens. So working locally with a very specific global objective. And that was what the SDGs are basically about. So we wanted to map what is happening with oil and gas potential in relationship to our proposal. And as you can see on this map, that when you look at the legend, that we're in pretty good shape, except up north by Russia, and also this area right here, which is very deep oil and gas. But I'll show you who's vying for this in just a minute. This is what our proposal looks like in relationship to other protected areas. So what you see here are the green areas, some of which you have a protective status, but they're not really enforced. But you can see how our proposal is a good intersection to all of these. And you have to remember that the Arctic Ocean, the Central Arctic Ocean or the Arctic Ocean is the smallest ocean, recognized ocean on the planet, and yet it has the most impact. The ice has the most impact on the globe. This shows again how the significance of our proposal, with other protected areas and the EEZs, which are the exclusive economic zones, which are the dark blue. And that's where nations have the 200-mile limit, and they can actually apply for an extension to the UN Continental Shelf Commission from 350 nautical miles from their coastline. And that is exactly what's happening. So what you see here is the light color is Russia's 2001 submission. And then they submitted 2 more times. The latest one was 2020. And the green is an addition to the light color. So what you have here is almost 70%, 65 to 70% of a non-jurisdictional seabed at this point is and ocean waters are being vied for by Russia. Now, why are they doing this? One of the reasons is because there are 2 ridges here in the Central Arctic Ocean on the southern side, more closer to Greenland. And the Geckel Ridge is suspected, and there's a Chinese ship that is right now doing scientific research. It's suspected that these nodules that you've heard about that have rare earth minerals, that there are a lot of those in the Geckel Ridge. And you already saw where the oil and gas is. So you would have to suspect that the intention is exploitation. Now, one of the things that Inga mentioned is that in developing a global call for this 10-year moratorium, which is absolutely urgent, we'd like to see this in place within 2 years. We have created an Arctic task force, which is legal experts, scientists, policy experts, international policy experts, to really look at an innovative approach, an innovative framework for getting this in place, and also inclusionary with more stakeholders, island nations, for example. There's a lot of other stakeholders that are looking at what's happening in the Arctic. It's not only the Arctic 8 or the Arctic 5. So we're pursuing that, and I think that our hope is that we have something that is new and innovative and hasn't been done before, because we don't have 10 years or 26 years to go through the UN process. It is too burdened with bureaucracy, and we're out of time. We're just basically out of time. So with that, we developed a network that Emma's going to talk about called the Arctic Angels. And we're just starting something called the Arctic Ice Force, which is global citizens around the world. Anybody, anywhere can join and stand up for the moratorium and for the global commons. And that's in the process of being developed now. The Arctic Angels are very well developed, and our former coordinator is sitting right here, and she has done a phenomenal job, and I am going to hand it over to her because they are the ice activists.
Can I have the next slide, please? One back. Hi, everybody. My name's Emma Wilkinson. And as Sally said, I was the coordinator of Arctic Angels until a couple of months ago, and I'm still part of the network collaborating with a lot of amazing young women around the world. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the network. It really, just to start with, though, Sally's outlined why we need to protect the Arctic and the kind of threats that it's facing. But it's a question of how we're going to make this happen. How are we going to protect the Arctic? And as Inga said, it's about galvanizing global voices and inclusion and raising awareness of the fact that the Arctic ice crisis is a global ice crisis and it affects everybody. The Arctic matters to each and every one of us. And it's about taking a system lens. So the Arctic Angels Network is youth-led, but intergenerational and international. And we've got some of the Arctic Angels, we've got actually around 10 of us here at COP. And the Arctic Angels are really leading women climate and climate justice activists. Some of them are not here, though. Ali in Canada is leading with Fridays for Future Toronto. She now also works for environmental defense. She's not here at COP, but she's mobilizing in her own community in Canada back home following COP. And the same for Sarah, who's there speaking with Nat Geo. She's a teacher and she lives in Mexico. And then we've got Mitzi Jonelle Tan, who is at COP26. You may have seen her speaking and at some of the protests. And she is really collaborating with her Fridays for Future MAPA activists, most affected places and areas. And then we've also got here a picture in the 2019 New York City climate strike that Inga and Sally were at with those amazing signs. And that was taken just before I became the coordinator of Arctic Angels. And that was in September 2019, like I said, and I became the coordinator in November 2019. And at that point, the Arctic Angels Network was only covering 2 countries, the UK and the US. And in that time since, we've now built the Arctic Angels Network with the support of Sally and Inga and the constant mentoring and empowerment to cover 27 countries from Uganda to Greenland to Brazil to the Philippines, because these Arctic Angels really understand, like I said, that the Arctic ice crisis matters to each and every one of them and all of us. And something quite special about the network as well is that there's activists of all kinds, from graphic designers to legal experts to protesters. And we're all collaborating, and we've got that kind of inclusion and realizing that we need all skills, and that activism comes in many forms. As I said as well, mentoring is really, really key to what we're doing. It's really tailored, and it's really working in a genuinely intergenerational way, and kind of learning as much. I hope that Inga and Sally, I know they would say the same, learning as much from each other as one another. And that's when you really, really build these relationships that are going to help you to make things like protecting the Central Arctic happen, and building a network of networks of people that are truly, really engaged in protecting the Arctic, and they understand and they're united and collaborating. And so Sally articulated beautifully how we are in an ice crisis. We've lost 28 trillion tons of ice in less than 3 decades. And the greatest losses have been from the Arctic. And of course, we need to stick to 1.5. And the Arctic ice will have a lot better chance of recovering if we do that. But we also need to protect what we have left. and so galvanizing global voices. And the Arctic Angels Network, if any of you are interested or want to share the network with your kind of networks as well, the Arctic Angels are women and non-binary environmentalists ranging in age from 16 to 35, and we're always welcoming new and engaged young people that want to be part of this network. And we also have the Arctic Ice Force, which is for all ages, all people around the world to unite behind this call to action to protect the Central Arctic. So I'll hand it back to Sally to wrap up. Or Inge, whichever you like.
Well, if I could just, I will hand over to you to wrap up, Sally, but just to pick up on a point, thank you, Emma. Also, just to emphasize that this is a collaborative effort. There is no way we're going to get where we have to get fast enough if we don't collaborate. And we're just so grateful. Thank you, Pam, and for the Cryosphere team here for giving us the space. But also, you know, bringing in the science. We're very science-based. We have a research library where we post constantly all the latest information so it's accessible. And it's about non-traditional collaboration as well. So, for example, we've had the Arctic Angels and the Issues featured in Italian Vogue and places like that, Ferragamo magazine, some really interesting spaces to get. There's no point preaching to the converted. We have to actually emphasize to others what is happening and why it's so important, you know, as Sally has so beautifully and eloquently said. So, Sally, I'm going to give it to you to wrap up.
Well, I also want to thank Pam for the space. Thank you so very much. And everybody who's here, thank you for your interest. And I hope that you'll come up and chat with us after this session. And I'm just looking at this sign back here that says, which future will we choose? And this is showing sea level rise. And we have to ask ourselves, you know, what we must get low, deep emission cuts. And we have to encourage global leaders to do that. If there's any global SOS that's visible and is also the litmus of evidence that they should be held accountable to, it's what's happened to the Arctic since 1979, actually, but a little before that, obviously, but we can see it. And they have not acted in a way, taken the decisions, the hard decisions that have to be made now because we're out of time. So I would rather have the 1.5 Celsius future than the 3. And we're on a trajectory now of 2.7 to 3. So global citizens, I can't stress this enough, we have to stand up as global citizens, united around the world, around deep emission cuts, heavy investment into renewables, including research in hydrogen, because solar and wind are not going to do the whole thing that has to be done. And also CCS. We need more research, more financing of CCS. And we also have to change in the developing world our consumer habits. And one interesting fact I want to leave you with, because this takes the ice to the streets. 1 ton of CO2, this is science verified, 1 ton of CO2 equals 32 square feet or 3 meters squared sea ice melt. So one of the things that is on our to-do wish list is creating an app that you can go into that's just for this purpose. And you can see how much ice you're melting or how much ice you're saving. So that, keep an eye on our website, and we will be announcing that app in the future. So thank you very much. We do have time. We do have time if we act now. It may not recover, the sea ice may not recover in, as quickly as it'd like to, but in many decades, it can recover on its own. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for explaining all your really beautiful initiatives. And I think that if there are some questions here or in Geneva or in Stockholm, please raise your hands. If not, right now I have just a thought. I mean, I think that the moratorium initiative is really, really relevant also because there are a lot of countries that actually want to claim these territories for oil and gas, etc. So, I mean, it's just not, it's not a question, but just a thought that stress the importance of your initiative, let's say. So, I mean, I am with you and I really hope the best. And also the app that you want to create is really wonderful because it's a way to visualize actually the pollution and the CO2 emissions. And I think it's really, really beautiful. So thanks. And yeah, I'm always open to if there are other questions. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Really enjoy hearing about these different elements. And I'd be interested to hear from you on kind of what it's felt like and to bring in these young voices and have people in nations that are also so far from the Arctic really understanding those connections across latitudes and just what that energy's felt like and what are some of the things that you've seen people getting up to. I mean, you mentioned some, but I look forward to hearing about more.
Well, thank you so much for that question. That was really lovely. And I can say it's been one of the biggest joys building this network and mentoring these young women and amazing activists and supporting them however I can in order to make their impact. It's the one thing that's just so inspiring. There's the question of what gives you hope, which is asked a lot of activists, but I think that is what gives me hope. The community, the solidarity and the unity in these networks and the love. And what we've been up to at COP, well, one thing, Mitzi Jonel Tan, who was on the screen there, last night we were actually on the river and there was an event, End Climate Betrayal, which if you are interested, Google, because there should be some media stories about it today. And if you like, please do drop me an email and I can keep you updated on some of the events that we do have happening at COP. There is a thread on our Twitter with the different events that we'll be speaking at throughout the rest of COP. And please do come up and chat to me. No need to just email me actually in real life. We're here in real life, so you can come up and I'll tell you some more about the events and where you might be able to meet some of the angels if you would like.
I'd like to add something to that. We Inga and I and two of our Arctic Angels were in Iceland about 3 weeks ago at the Arctic Circle Assembly. And one of our angels, Aluna, is an indigenous young woman from northern Greenland. And she shared some stories which really brought this whole thing home. And she's very much an activist and very articulate. And she said, our elders, because they're the teachers, obviously, and the oral history, she says, the stories that our elders have been teaching us don't apply now because things have changed so much. And that just broke my heart because that's her whole lineage. That's her people's lineage. And of course, their subsistence hunting is being impacted. And so she's really stepped up and she shows up, steps up and speaks out. And that's another example of an Arctic Angel who she could speak anywhere in the world and people would understand, what they're facing right there on the ground and what the bigger picture is for this Earth system. It is an indispensable planetary cooling system that we're letting unravel on our watch by not holding our leaders accountable. So, so I just want to encourage you to let your networks know and join the fight with us, please.
Are there any more questions? Anybody else want to ask anything?
I have an insatiable curiosity, I must admit. And I apologize if you covered this earlier, as I wasn't here right at the start of the session, but I'd be interested to hear more about the next steps in seeking this moratorium and what's really coming up for expanding that movement and really making that interest a reality.
Well, as Sally mentioned, the task force. It's obviously a huge challenge to get something like this going and to get it going fast. So one of the things we've done is look at precedents. One of the really interesting precedents has been the fishing treaty. And who would ever have thought that Russia would have been the first to sign up? Now, obviously, this is a much more complex situation. And as the ice melts, the geopolitics are heating up too. So it's going to need a lot of very quiet diplomacy. And also needs a lot of very, I think, smart design. And that's what this task force is about. So we're pulling that together to get, and it's not just the traditional voices, as we mentioned, it's actually looking at much broader voices and the global commons, mobilizing that. And I think we have now, as dare one uses, terrible pun, sea change in terms of what people are looking to in terms of governance. And so those are our next steps. We're not in a place where we're going to announce how we're going to do it, but certainly there is a lot of quiet diplomacy going on. I think there is also a very big opportunity, interestingly enough. It's not just obviously protecting from the threat, it's also understanding the opportunity to prevent business as usual, and that this is not an El Dorado that everyone can have free fall and climb in there and exploit the hell out of it. Excuse the language. But can we elevate ourselves as global citizens to find a space like this that we do actually put into practice what we know has to happen and make it future fit? And that's, our ambition. And so far we're getting some really interesting responses, actually, surprisingly, because we do need it. The Arctic has always been a poster child for peace in a very conflicted world. And I think that this is an opportunity to reinforce that in a new way and also to take some lessons. And we have Divya here, one of our Arctic Angels, who has twice been to Antarctica. Take some lessons from Antarctica. And why the governance of Antarctica has been successful has been because it's been a broader coalition. And so we, building on that, would like to see a broader coalition develop for the Arctic. And that is not to say that the Arctic Council and others haven't governed that space beautifully, but we are in a very, very different world now. And a world, as Sally has said and Emma has said, in which we all have to take responsibility if we want these systems to protect our world.
Well, I can't add much to that other than, again, on our horizon is, for lack of a better word, is putting together a roundtable at a think tank, bringing in these stakeholders to really dive into this. And we actually want to do that pretty soon after COP as well. So we do have a strategy, some of which we can talk about and some of which we don't want to yet. But we are very serious, very, very serious about taking this forward because it has to happen.
Thank you. If there are more questions, we have still some minutes left. If not, thank you again for all your speeches, and yeah, thanks. So the next appointment here will be